There we go. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let me put on the share screen there. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Mills. I hope you're well. Today is Wednesday. It is the 16th of August, and we're getting ready for Parshas Shoftim. And after a brief 2-week reprieve, it's a pleasure to be back with you. All right. So I want to share with you a couple of items on Parshas Shoftim, and we're going to see 3 items today. 2 of them are, I would say, a little bit more traditional, and one of them is a fascinating nugget of history that Rabbi Sorotskin let us in on with his Aznaim L'Torah that I was not 100% familiar with before. So let's see. Let's see the first one. So we're in Parshas Shoftim. So this is now towards the end of the Parsha. We're told that when Bnei Yisrael would go off to war, the soldiers were given an out. In other words, they didn't want to have any soldiers who were going to be in a frightful state of mind, who might go ahead and discourage others and bring down the morale. So they give an out to those who might be a little bit unsettled. Let's see what some of those outs are. So the pasuk says, it's in Perek Chaf, that's chapter 20, pasuk Hey, the officers speak to the people and they say, Lemor, is there anyone here who's built a new home? And has not yet inaugurated it. Let them go home and return to their house. Because maybe they'll die in the war and then someone else will end up inaugurate it. That might have someone distressed. So if anyone is in that position, they're allowed to go home. Is there anyone here who's planted a vineyard and has not yet redeemed it? They should return home. Someone else will redeem it. What that's referring to with redeem is that with fruit-bearing trees, we have to wait until the 4th year to eat their fruit. So what he means is that if you've already planted a vineyard and you haven't yet had a chance to eat its fruit because it's been the first 3 years and now it's the 4th year, and you're going to have that fruit to bring it to Yerushalayim, that first one. If you haven't yet had a chance to do that, you can go home and take care of that because someone else might do that in your place if you die in war. So these are some of the items that might have a person distressed. And we're told that a person is allowed to go home, is allowed to leave the field of battle because of this. Let's see Rashi. So this is going on that if I built a house, did someone build a house and did not yet have a chance to inaugurate it, go home, because maybe they'll die in war and someone else might inaugurate, live in it first. This would be a source of great grief. This would really cause the person some serious distress. The more they sit and think about this, that they're going to die in battle, and now someone else is going to make use of their house before they had a chance to enjoy it, that might cause them an incredible amount of grief, and that could demoralize them, and that could spread to others. So they said, go home. That's what we're told there. The Sifsei Chachamim, that's a commentary on Rashi. You see, he just spells this out a little more. He's going on Rashi, Davar Shalagmas Nefeshu. He says this idea that someone else might enjoy it before he's had a chance to enjoy the house, which would really be the same with the vineyard as well, that causes grief. So the Sifsei Chachamim explains that by saying Dim Lokain, if it wasn't for this, meaning otherwise, what difference does it make if he's the one who inaugurates it or someone else? Obviously, by the fact that the Torah is saying that this person is going to feel the stress, and maybe they'll die in combat and someone else is going to be the first one to use it, that's going to cause an incredible amount of stress. Go home, because this could totally ruin the person's ability to engage in combat, and it could also completely ruin this person's ability to inspire those around him. That's what we're told. So a friend of mine, I've quoted him before, Rabbi Shimon Feder, we were go back to high school classmates. He had a great observation on this. He said, isn't this really interesting? The pasuk says, what's the person worried about? Maybe they'll die in war. And then what? They have this house that they haven't yet had a chance to enjoy, and someone else is going to enjoy it. Why isn't the fact that this person is shaken to the core, the fact that he might die in war, reason enough for him to be a nervous wreck and and really fall apart and cause this lack of morale for himself and everybody else? Why is this other step? Oh, maybe he'll die in battle. Okay, and if that's not enough, I've got this house that I've built and I haven't had a chance to live in yet. And someone else, now the guy's going to fall apart. Seems to be like that's the icing on the cake that can make the person fall apart. What about the fact that he's going to die? He's got all these relatives that he'll never be able to see again, celebrate at their family occasions, life cycle events, whatever it is. The person won't be able to enjoy another sunset, sunrise. Why isn't that enough to make him fall apart? What's going to make this guy fall apart? He built a house and hasn't yet had a chance to enjoy it, and someone might beat him to it. That's going to just make him fall apart. It sounds like from this, what the Torah is telling us, as explained by Rashi, is that what might even be as shocking as it sounds, what might be more powerful of an emotion for someone is that someone else might get control of their possessions when they've never had a chance to use it. That might rattle a person more than their own death, which is wild if you think about it. That's what the Torah is telling us here. This person's allowed to go home. Why? Because he might die and he has a house that he hasn't yet had a chance to enjoy. Someone else might get to it first. Why is that going to make him flip out? Why is that going to make him become more of a wreck and unravel more than just the fact that he's going to die and never enjoy life again? Seems like he might have it under control until that point, but now when he starts thinking about someone else might have his stuff when he's never had a chance to enjoy it, that might drive him batty. It sounds from this that this is just a natural human reaction. We're programmed to be very possessive of our belongings, and that's just the way we're hardwired. And if we don't get control of that, if we don't learn how to say, well, what's important in life and what's not, we can really become incredibly possessive of our stuff to the point where that can bother us. What happens more to our possessions, more than life itself. And that seems to be what's happening here. I remember this, that we're saying that we're hardwired to be possessive of our items and to feel a sense of ownership. I remember having this really powerful conversation when I was in high school. We had an Israeli who was living in Milwaukee. I went to Yeshiva High School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There was an Israeli who was living in Milwaukee. He was he worked in the travel agency. His name was Ophir Ben Yitzchak. He had a very deep voice, and he taught us Ivrit in high school. Ophir Ben Yitzchak. And Ophir Ben Yitzchak, aside from being a travel agent, so I guess in the afternoons to make a second job, he was teaching Ivrit in Yeshiva High School. And I remember, he would have a lot of conversations with us in Hebrew. And we were asking him once, like, Ophir, tell us about your childhood. And he was telling us he grew up on a kibbutz in Israel, a real heavy-duty communist kibbutz. And we asked him, did you have a happy childhood? He goes, yeah, pretty much. So we said, look, what made you leave the kibbutz? Now you're out in Milwaukee working as a travel agent. Yeah, what made you leave the kibbutz? And he said he became completely disenchanted with communism because it was a really heavy-duty communist kibbutz. And we asked him, we said, this is fascinating. We said, at what point in life when did this happen? Like, when did you realize that there was a serious flaw in communism? And he told us the most fascinating story. He said he was a young boy growing up on this kibbutz, and nobody owned their own possessions because it was totally communal, communist. And he had an uncle, a wealthy uncle, who came to visit once from England. And his uncle was so happy to see him, his little nephew, he gave him as a gift a 50-pound note. And he put it away in his dresser. And I guess there must have been other people in the house when his uncle gave him the note. And however many hours went by, there was a knock at the door. It was from someone in the office of the kibbutz that said, we reported come in that you've received monetary compensation from a relative who's visiting. We don't own anything here personally. It's all communal. Hand over the 50-pound note. And he says, try to explain to a young boy, I don't care, all the theories and the books, the volumes and everything that's written about why communism makes sense. Try to explain to a little boy why he's got to hand over the 50-pound note that his uncle from England just gave to him. You ain't going to do it. He says, that's not the way, that's not human nature. That's not the way we're hardwired. We're hardwired to possess things and to have individuality and to care about our possessions. And he says, from that point on, it was all downhill. I couldn't, he says, I couldn't fight because I was a little kid, but I knew something was wrong here. And I remember that made such an impact on me is that, it's fascinating. There's been so much that's been written about communism, collectivism, all the stuff that's out there. All it took was this little boy to have to hand over the gift that his uncle gave him to see straight through that and say, no, there's a problem. And we're hardwired to own our items and to possess them. That's just the way we're born. That's the way that we're made. And what this is telling us is that if we don't get that under control, that's not a bad thing. But if we don't learn how to evaluate what's really important and what's not, then we could get to a point where we care more about our possessions than our lives itself. And that seems to be what happened here. Let's take a look at a second item. A second item is the Torah is telling us something that's on the surface It seems very, very harsh. We'll soon see that it can be made a little bit less harsh, but let's take a look at what a plain reading of Psukim. A little bit later in that pasuk, it's telling us about when we live in Israel and we're going to face off against the natives who lived there, those tribes that lived in Israel before the Jews showed up, the Canaanim, the Chitim, the Amorim, all these people, and we're supposed to get them out of there. So the pasuk says, "Rak me'areu amim ha'ila asher Hashem Elokecha nosen lecha nachala lo sechaya kol neshama." If we go to war against them, it's got to be complete and total war. We shouldn't allow any survivors. Next pasuk, Yud Zayin, ki hacharim tachrimeim, where we have to utterly destroy them. And it lists who are they? It says they are the Chiti, Amori, Aknani, Aprizi, Chivi, Hayavusi. So it lists 7 nations right there. It just listed 6. Actually, just listed 6, but there's 7. It says Chiti, Amori, Kanani, Prizi, Chivi, and Yavusi. So who's missing? I think Rashi comments on that someone was missing there. But there's 7 nations, the Zion Amim, we're going to go to war against, and it's total war. There can't be any survivors left. That's what God has ordered us. Next pasuk, Yud Ches, top of page 2. So the next pasuk says, Laman, what's the reason that we need to go to complete war? Laman asher lo yilamdu eschem, we need to eradicate them so they don't start to teach us lasos kechol ta'avosam, to engage in all of the abominations that they were engaged in, asher asu le'eloheim, that they committed when they would worship their false gods. Because if we start to mimic them, act and follow the way they do, then it'll be a great offense, a great sin to God. That's what the pasuk says. Now, just before we see the Ramban, just on the surface, that seems extremely harsh, that we're going into the land of Israel. It's going to be absolute all-out war. We have to eradicate every single one of them. Just to understand, Rambam writes this, and it's based on the Gemara. It's not necessarily the case. The case was as follows. When Bnei Yisrael went into war, they gave the locals a couple of options. Option number 1, leave. We're here to possess this land. If you want, and you don't want to go to war, you don't want to change your lifestyles, leave. Get out of Canaan, get out of Israel. That's option number 1. Option number 2, you can stay, but if you stay, you got to totally abandon idol worship. You got to take on the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 universal laws of humanity, and you got to pay taxes and engage in some type of national service, whether that means helping us build roads, something like that. That was option number 2. Option number 3 was if you don't want to leave, and if you choose to stay here and hang on to your idolatrous pagan ways, it's going to be absolute war. And absolute war means we're going to get every last one of you. Now, it happens to be that's what they all chose. But that wasn't the only option that Bnei Yisrael gave them. They did, so in other words, this does look extremely harsh, and I've seen people always point a finger at the Old Testament, and they'll say, look at this barbaric nation that they claim to be led by the ultimate lawgiver, and they're going in this ultimate eradication of all the locals. Again, according to the Gemara, and Rambam brings this down also, they were given other options. Option 1 was leave. You don't have to fight us. If you want to keep your lifestyle, just take it elsewhere. Option 2 was you can stay, but if you're going to stay, you got to abandon idolatry, keep the 7 laws of Noach, and pay taxes and help us with national service. Option 3 was if they didn't want either of those, then it was absolute all-out war. And again, that's the way it played out. We're told there's only one nation that picked up and left, and that was the Girgashi. According to most opinions, they went to Africa, and they were zocha. They were given a very nice peace there because they chose to leave Eretz Yisrael, and they wanted to not engage in war with Bnei Yisrael. According to others, I've seen that a minority opinion that they ended up in parts of Europe. But this is the Girgashi was the only nation that left. The others chose all-out war. They didn't want to change their lifestyle, and they were obliterated. The only exceptions to those were the Givonim. The Givonim duped Yoshua to say that we came from some faraway nation. We want to engage and enter into some kind of peace treaty with you. So that was one small tribe that did that. Okay, we're going to see this Ramban. What's bothering the Ramban is, why is it so important that if these guys, idolaters, if they chose to stay and not change their lifestyle, why does it have to be absolute war? That lo sechayek kol neshama, that if they chose war, we're not going to leave any survivors. That's very, very hard. Why? What are we so nervous about them? Or do we really think they're going to, gang up on us? What's the reason there? So let's see this Ramban. The Ramban explains as follows. Vitam, what's the reason why we've got to engage in all-out war. So Ramban writes, Asher lo yilmedu eschem lasos kechot havosam. The pasuk is very clear. The reason why we got to eradicate them is because we don't want them to influence us. We don't want them to teach us all of their abominations, Asher asu lelohem, what they used to worship all their pagan rites, how they went and worshipped in their pagan temples. We don't want that. The only way to prevent that from creeping into our lifestyle, if they choose to stay, is to eradicate them. So Ramban continues, Shiomedu Eschem, there was a real fear that they would educate us, La'avod Hashem Anichba, to start worshiping God, B'sreifas B'nechem Uvnosechem, by burning alive our children, our sons and daughters, like the way they worship Molech. B'chol Tovavas Hashem, everything that God detests. Asher Sonei, that Hashem hates, V'chatasem Hashem Lokechem. This would be a terrible sin to God. God has warned us on multiple occasions, that we should not have the attitude. How did those pagans used to serve their false gods? Because I want to do likewise. The Torah told us multiple times we should not enter into that mindset. Now behold, the Torah warns us, that we shouldn't allow them to dwell in our land, because maybe they would cause us to sin towards God, because we'll start worshiping the same way they worship their false gods. It'll be a stumbling block to us. And this was a warning about idolatry. If we enter into some kind of covenant, peace treaty with them and their false gods, they'll live in our land. If we allow multitudes of them to live in our land, they'll eventually convince us to start worshiping idols. Now Ramban adds, and this is what I put in bold, but this pasuk, when he says we can't even let a single survivor survive, the kan hosted, here the Torah is adding an additional detail. Levaer, the Torah is explaining, Shalot techaya kol neshama, we can't let any of them survive if they choose to stay in Israel. Ki afilu hayachid, even if there was one, hanishar benechem, who we allowed to remain in our midst, lavod ulecha, and we allowed this guy to, let's say, work as a slave for us, yazkir lecha, he will remind us, or he'll educate us, teach us, avodosam leelohem, how they used to worship their false gods. Vulai tifta ata lasos kain. And that will end up seducing, that will end up convincing us to do similar, l'shem anechba, that we should adopt their pagan worship ceremonies into our worship of God, and that would be a grave sin to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what the Ramban is adding here is that the whole fear of allowing these guys to remain in Israel, the whole fear is that maybe they're going to start teaching us how they used to worship their false gods. That'll spill over into our own worship of Hashem, and that'll be a terrible sin. And what does it say? Afilu yachid, even one could have that effect on us. So this is a big chiddush. This is a very novel idea. I would have imagined that if we're having this concept that we're nervous about negative influence, if we got a sizable chunk of them around, then that could be a negative influence on us. But what Ramban is telling us, the pasuk is saying, even one. All it takes is one. All it takes is one to find a listening audience, and they can end up totally ruining things for Bnei Israel. This is incredible. It doesn't make a difference what kind of a lowlife this guy is. It doesn't make a difference if this is, at the bottom rung of society. It doesn't make a difference anything about this person. All it takes is one. If we have this one person, this could totally infect us. I think there's a great lesson here. This lesson would be, and again, my friend Rabbi Feder was pointing this out, I think this is so true. There's a great lesson here. And that lesson is, we sometimes think, who's going to be an influence on me? Okay, if it's someone who's from the upper echelons of society, if it's someone who's an important person, a celebrity, a good-looking movie star, someone like that, they might have an impact on me. But what about some lowlife, I'm strong enough. Is that person really going to have any kind of impact on me? And I think the lesson from this Ramban, what he's telling us is that we're very malleable. As much as we like to think of ourselves as being so strong and unswayable, that's just not true. Human nature is, every single one of us can be affected by somebody else. And it doesn't have to be someone who's coming from the highest rungs of society. It doesn't have to be someone who is some kind of celebrity. It could be a lowlife. We have to choose our acquaintances very, very carefully. And we should never make the mistake of thinking, I'm above being influenced by others. That stuff's in the gutter. It's not going to get me. It's not true. We're very, very receptive towards being influenced. That's just the human nature. That's the way we're hardwired. And none of us should make the mistake of thinking, I'm above that. I'm strong enough that I'm not going to be influence. So we have to think, if we are rubbing shoulders with people who don't share our values, we don't all have the liberty of just retreating and running somewhere in the wilderness and setting up our own desert island with people who are like-minded individuals. We're going to be around people who don't share our value system. So we have to realize that we're fooling ourselves if we think that sooner or later those other attitudes aren't rubbing off on us. And we have to make efforts to check in, take a good hard look in the mirror every now and then, and say, what are my worldviews? What's guiding me? What is my value system? Is it the Torah, or is it the other things that are around me? And we're fooling ourselves if we think we're not going to be influenced. That's just the way the world works. That's the way the human being. That's the way we've been hardwired. That's the human condition. And this really reminds us that Ramban saying all it takes is one. All it takes one, and idol worship could be introduced. All the pagan abominations could be introduced into Bnei Yisrael. We are easily influenced. So we have to take our safeguards. Okay, now I want to take a look at the end of the Parsha. The end of the Parsha, which is Perek Chaf Aleph, I always find fascinating. It's the Egla Arufa. So let's read the psukim on it. We're going to see 9 psukim on it. Then we're going to see something from Rav Sorotzkin that's going to give us a wild piece of history. So let's see. The pasuk starts, it's in Perek Chaf Aleph, it's verse Aleph, it's in chapter 21, about the Egla Arufa. Ki matzeh chalal ba'adama. If you find a corpse, you find a slain person laying on the ground, asher Hashem Elokecha nosen l'chal rishta nofel basada. We find someone who was murdered, lying in a field, and in the land of Israel, v'lo noda mi hiko. We don't know who struck him. We don't know who the murderer was. Bays. So obviously we try to do our best to hunt down. We have a criminal investigation, but we can't find the killer. We don't know who was responsible. So here's what we do. Bays. Then the elders and the judges should go forth. So all the Mefarshim say this is from the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. They send a delegation and they measure the area where this corpse was found. And it'll be the city that is closest to that corpse. So now, once we've identified what's the closest city, we're going to say it's upon that city to be a form of kapara, to somehow go through this ritual, which is going to atone for the fact that this murder occurred in Israel. And what are we going to do? We're going to find a young calf that has never engaged in work and has never drawn a yoke. Daled. They're going to bring that young calf down to a rugged valley, a valley that no work had ever been done in it, meaning that they never had tried to grow anything there, and it had never grown anything. And there, they're basically going to take an axe, they're going to strike this calf at the back of the neck, they're going to lop its head off. It's the Egla Arufa, they're going to decapitate it. Very unusual. Usually when we kill animals, it's with shchita, it's with slaughtering. And now this is being done in such an unusual fashion. I saw some of the commentaries, I believe it was Rambam, I believe it was Maimonides, he says this in his Mar Nevuchim, that how do you explain this, that we're killing this animal in such a cruel fashion? He says it was specifically set up in this or it was either him or Rabbi. It was either him or Rabbi, or sometimes I have to look back at my notes. They say that the reason it's done this way is because what we were trying to do is create this entire buzz that we better find this killer. We better find this killer. If we can't find this killer, we're going to have to go through the Egla Arufa ritual. The Egla Arufa ritual we don't want to do because, first of all, you're going to see in another pasuk or two that the area that we kill this animal in can never be farmed, can never be used to raise crops again. And who wants to give up a valuable piece of real estate? So that's number one. But number two, the manner in which this animal is going to be killed is an abhorrent fashion. Who wants to kill an animal like this? It makes us shudder. You're just going to take an axe to the back of the neck and decapitate it? We're used to killing animals in such a kind way of shechita. Who kills an animal like this? It just goes against the Jewish mindset. It's going to make everyone shudder. So I believe it's Rambam that what he writes is this will inspire everybody to work harder to find the killer. Let's get let's get that dragnet out there. Let's find this killer because we don't want to have to resort to the Eglah Rufa ritual. Number one, we're going to lose valuable land, and number two, we're going to have to kill the animal in this fashion. So it's a deterrent. That's the way Rambam sets this up. It was a deterrent that we wouldn't want to kill an animal this way. I thought it was a very good way to look at this. Let's see next pasuk. Hey, v'nigshu kohanim. So after this animal is decapitated, v'nigshu kohanim b'nei Levi. Then the kohanim who are from the tribe of Levi step forward. Kibam b'char Hashem elokecha l'sharso. By the way, those are the fellas that have been chosen by God to serve Him. Ulevarich b'shem Hashem, and to bless others in the name of God. And it's through their mouths, meaning through their instructions, that every controversy is supposed to be settled, and every lesion, meaning by tzaras, is supposed to be ruled upon. So it's just reminding us who is the role of the Kohanim. Now, Vav, next pasuk, and also along with the Kohanim come the Zakanim of the city that was closest, the elders of the city that was close to the corpse. They wash their hands over the corpse of this decapitated calf. Harufa Banachal, that's in the valley. Next pasuk, we're on page 3. So pasuk Zion says, and they respond, they announce, and they say, Yodenu lo shafchu es adam hazeh. Our hands did not spill this blood, meaning the blood of the corpse. Ve'inenu lo ro'u, and our eyes did not see the crime. We are innocent. Kaper lamcha Yisrael asher padisa Hashem. Please, God, atone for the people that you have redeemed from Egypt. Al titan dam naki b'kerev amcha Yisrael, and don't let the guilt of innocent blood among the people of Israel. V'nikaper lam adam. And if we go through this ritual, then the blood will be atoned for them. Test, last pasuk, adam naki mikirbecha. You shall abolish the shedding of blood, innocent blood, from your midst. Kisasa hayashar b'nei Hashem. Because Hashem wants us to do what's proper in the eyes of God. So this ritual, this very unique ritual, the Eglah Rupa ritual. It's always fascinated me for so many different reasons, but that's the basic procedure. I saw something from Rabbi Sorotzkin this year that I had never thought of this question before, and it's a great question. He gives wonderful meaning to part of this ritual that I'd never stopped and thought of before. And in the process, he's going to let us in on a nugget of Jewish history I don't think any of us were aware of before. I know I wasn't. Let's take a quick drink and we'll continue. Okay, so let's see Rabbi Sorotzkin in his Aznaim Torah. So the bottom of page 3, it says, V'nigshu kohanim b'nei Levi, ki bam b'chara Hashem, Elokeinu l'sharso, because it was the tribe of Levi, they're the ones that God has chosen to serve Him, ulevarich b'shem Hashem, and to bless in the name of God, PM, and through their mouths, through their instructions, kol riv v'chol nega. That's how we know to settle every dispute and how to rule in every case of tzaras. Okay. Shamati mipi kadosh shel Hagon Tzadik Rav Naftali Zatzal Zilberberg. He says, I heard from the holy mouth of the sainted Rav Naftali Zilberberg, mi Vir Yeshuv. I don't know where this city was. I don't know what city that is, but obviously this was a great tzaddik. Look at the way that Rav Sorotzkin is referring to him. So this is just a reminder that we don't have any clue of so many of the Gedolim, the great Rabbanim, the great leaders in Talmidei Chachamim who lived in Europe before the Holocaust. We know of some, the ones who left us some Sfarim, we know of them, but there were so many Talmidei Chachamim who were serving with such Mesiras Nefesh in towns across the old country we don't know of. I don't recognize his name. I'm sure this was a great person by the way he's describing him. So Sorotzkin says, I have to tell you something beautiful that I heard from Rav Zilberberg. Shebeshas hamachlokes hamifursemes. At the time of the well-known argument, Neged Hagon Ha'adir, that there was this incredible argument that people were out to get, this incredible sage, Tzaddik Yesod Olam. That's that abbreviation. Who was a tzaddik, who was the basis of our world. That's a way of saying, look, the world rested on his shoulders. Who was this tzaddik? Rav Yaakov, you see his last name? Gesundheit. There was this famous Rabbi Yaakov Gesundheit Zatzal. There was a Rabbi Yaakov Gesundheit who was the Av Beis Din de Varsha, who was the Av Beis Din of Warsaw. So first, just look what happens here. Okay, let's pause for a second. Now, Sorotskin's going to tell us here. He says we're going to see a beautiful pshat in this pasuk from Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. This is something that happened in a terrible dispute that he was engaged in, and this Rav Yaakov Gesundheit was engaged in this dispute, and this is, he says, I heard this personally from Rav Zilverberg. Again, I don't know where Rav Zilverberg was. Until this, I don't think I really knew much about Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. I recognize the name just because it's such an, I don't want to say funny sounding name, but unusual sounding name. Gesundheit is what we respond when someone sneezes. How on earth did he get a family name of Gesundheit? I don't know. I don't know how he ended up with that name. The only reason I know that name was because it's such an unusual name that I recognized it. There was a sefer that on Maseches Gittin that they had in yeshiva it was called Tiferes Yaakov. It was something that he wrote, and it was sure enough. I remember because it struck me. Whoever heard of the last name like that? That was his name, Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. And I remember it must have come up in Shir every now and then that when I was in yeshiva, Rabbi, if we were learning Gittin, would quote from Tiferes Yaakov, was written by Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. That's the only way there. What was the machlokas of Rav Yaakov Gesundheit? We'll get there in a second, because again, there's a piece of Jewish history I was totally unaware. But be that as it may, Rav Yaakov Gesundheit was a Gaon Adir, was a massive sage, who was for some time was the Av Beis Din of Varsha, of Warsaw in Poland. Let's see. So it says, Av Beis Din de Varsha, Nikru Gimel Gedolei Ador, Hahu, 3 giants of that generation were called Lashkin Shalom Ba'ir, to try to establish peace. So there was this raging machlokas taking place in Warsaw in the time of Rav Yaakov Gesundheit, and 3 massive sages, doesn't tell us who they were, 3 of them were brought in to try to establish peace in the town. Hadavar lo also biyadim. They were not successful. Apparently the machlokas raged, and we'll soon see Rav Yaakov Gesundheit was kicked out. He lost his position. V'terem azvam esa'ir, before they left the city, they did the best that they could to be peacemakers, but before they left the city, Bo'ala gon Rav Yaakov Gesundheit lakachas mimeno brochas hapreda. And they said, before they leave, we're going to go to Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. We came here, we saw he was under attack, and we came here to try to make peace. We were not successful. Before they leave, they're going to go to Rav Yaakov Gesundheit for a blessing. I go to Rav Yaakov Gesundheit, asa suda l'chvodam. He made a big meal in their honor. Ukibed es echad mehem shaya Cohen. And one of these 3 giants who had come there to make peace was a Cohen. He honored him. He says, "You're a Cohen. Lead us in benching." Nothing unusual yet. The terem shenasan as a kosh shal bracha al yado. Before he gave him a cup of wine that he should lead the benching, Amar lo, he said to this Kohen, Ishi Kohen, my master the Kohen, Tevarech b'kavana miyuchedes. I need you, when you're benching, to recite Birchas Hamazon with incredible kavana, great intent. Hispalu hamasubim agdolim al divrei Rav Amor Dasra, and everyone was kind of shocked. What's going on? It's one thing to ask the Kohen to bench. That's normal. Why are you asking him? Now that you're the Kohen, I need you to bench with great kavana. So they all asked him, Rabbi Yaakov Gesundheit, you're this great sage who's the Av Beis Din, the head of the rabbinate of Warsaw. Explain yourself to us. His Biras Dvarav, he explained himself, and here's what he said. The Parshazu, Parshas Shoftim. It was, this whole incident occurred in Parshas Shoftim. So he says in this week's Parshas Shoftim, Yesh Kusher Gedola. I always have this big question. Why does our pasuk go out of its way to explain Mihema Kohanim? Just who are the Kohanim? Again, what did the pasuk say? That the Kohanim come forward. And by the way, who are the Kohanim? They're the ones that God chose to serve him. They're the ones who bless Bnei Yisrael. They're the ones who give instructions to settle all quarrels and to decide on saras. Why is the Torah giving us this whole identification about the Kohanim? Umahi Te'uda Sam B'Yisrael, and reminding us what their role is in Israel. Is this the first time we've heard of Kohanim? We know what their job description is. Why does the Torah here feel the need to give us a whole job description? Don't we already know Shehem Misharsei Hashem? They're the ones who serve God in the Beis Hamikdash. And don't we know they're the ones who bench us? They do Birchas Kohanim. And they're the ones who see when someone has a nega, has tzaras, they're the ones who check it out. Why is the pasuk going on with this lengthy description here? Ivam Bachar Hashem Elokim L'Sharso, that God has chosen them to serve Him. U'Levarach B'Shem Hashem, and to bless Bnei Yisrael in His name. V'Alpiyam Yeh Kol Riv V'Kol Nega, and it's through them that, through their instruction, through their mouths, that every argument is going to be worked out and every tzaras is going to be examined. So what's going on? Parsha Egla Rufa, and then even more basic question: why are the Kohanim mentioned here at all? What are they doing here? I understand you needed the shotrim, the officers. They needed the zakanim from the Sanhedrin to come out and do a measurement to see which town was closest to the corpse. We need to know which town has to bring the Egla Rufa. And then the elders of the nearest town come forward when it's time to decapitate the calf, and to wash their hands. And they say, second column, and they got to say that our hands didn't spill the blood. Okay, we get that. About Kohanim, who needed the Kohanim here? What are they here for? So that was Rabbi Gesundheit's question. Rabbi Gesundheit's question was, what's going on? Why are the Kohanim here? Why are they being mentioned? That's the most basic question. And if they are being mentioned, why is the pasuk giving us their whole job description? So he says, I'll explain it to you. The pasuk is explaining to us, it's not just the elders who need to wash their hands. Because remember, we say Rashi quotes a famous Gemara. Does the Zakanim really need to say we didn't commit this crime? Of course they didn't. Rather, what they're saying is we didn't do anything that contributed to it. We didn't see this guy come to town and he didn't have enough food or water, and we didn't supply him with it. We didn't see the stranger come to town who needed an escort, and we didn't supply him with it. Also the Kohanim themselves, they may have played some role in this guy's downfall, in this guy's murder. How? Because what's the role? What's one of the job descriptions of a Kohen? The Sharso, to serve God, Ulevarach B'Shem Hashem, and to bless Bnei Yisrael in God's name. Umaya bracha. What's the blessing that the Kohanim share with the Jewish people? Shalom. The power of the Kohen's blessing, they're trying to bring peace. They're trying to bring shalom to Bnei Yisrael. Everything goes after the final seal, and the final end of the bracha is shalom, that they should be bringing v'yasem l'cha shalom. That's the essence of the Birchas Kohanim, is that there should be shalom. If the Kohanim would have only benched Bnei Yisrael with the proper intent, uvalev shalom, with a complete heart, a murder wouldn't have happened. So if a murder took place, that means there's no shalom. If there's no shalom, that means the Kohanim weren't doing their job properly. For another Jew to stand up against another Jew, and to murder another, befrat al admas Yisrael, in the land of Israel, that's what the pasuk is emphasizing here. It's through the mouth of the Kohanim that there is any riv, that there is any argument, that there's any nega. Meaning it's not that it's through their instruction that tells us how to solve. It's saying it's their fault. If there ever is a fight in Bnei Yisrael, then it's because of them. They must not have been doing their job hard enough. They haven't been benching us with a leiv shalom, because they have the power to be v'yasem l'cha shalom. Al PM shebirchas ma'irach mi PM. It was only from their mouths. Yakol riv v'chol nega b'Yisrael. That's why the most basic question, what are the Kohanim doing here? The Kohanim are by the Egla Rufa to say, we're not responsible for this. We did our job. We did what we needed to do. We benched Bnei Yisrael with a leiv shalom. And they got to now engage in tshuva, and they got to include themselves in that prayer that says, God, forgive the Jewish people. And he says, to know from here on out, we have to work harder to bench Bnei Yisrael. We got to work harder to be the conduits of bringing shalom to the Jewish people. That's how he says, that's how he explains it. That's why the pasuk is going out of its way to remind us what's the job of the Kohen, because the pasuk is reminding us what the Kohen are doing there. The reason the Kohanim are there by Egla Rufa is because since their whole job was to bring shalom, and now this happened, it means they weren't doing their job so well. They have a little bit of tshuva to engage in as well, and to clarify that from here on out, we're going to try and do a better job. That's why Rabbi Yaakov Gesundheit now turned to the Kohen, who he asked to honor them with benching. when he's in the middle of this machlokas that's raging in Warsaw, he says, I asked you to bench, and I asked you, when you're benching, make sure to have kavana. Das asher lefanecha, know what's in front of you. Levarich al hamazon bekavana tzuma, and I want you to bench with great kavana. Shebirchas hamazon ibirchas hashalom. So much of the birchas hamazon is about shalom. Kamar Zalik, what it says, he quotes a Gemara about Metzia, and then after he goes to the Siyuma to birchas hamazon. What do we say at the end of birchas hamazon? Ano omrim v'rachmim v'chaim v'shalom. And then also Hashem Ozlam Moyitena Hashem Yivarchas Hamo B'Shalom. That so much of Birchas Hamazon is about Shalom, asking God to bless us with peace. So this is beautiful. What he's saying is, Rabbi Yaakov Gesundheit, he said to the Kohen who he's asking to lead the bench, since there's a machlokas that's going on here, I need you to as a Kohen, to really be engaging with believe, use your heart and great kavana, that there should be shalom. That's what he says. But that's how he used this story to explain what's going on in our psukim, which I never thought about before. What are the Kohanim doing here? Why do they have a role in the Eglah Rufa? This is a beautiful way to explain it. Now, we're not going to have time for all this now, but just if you're curious, what was the machlokas? It got me all curious. What was the machlokas about Rabbi Yaakov Gesundheit? What happened? So if you see here, this is on page 4 and 5. You'll see here on page 4, this is from a new edition. He wrote a commentary to the Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat. There you see Tiferes Yaakov al Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat. It says Me'ez Hagon Amiti. It says Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. And there it is, Av Beis Din Kehila Varsha, that he was the head rabbi of Warsaw. And you see there's a picture of him. And he lived from 1815 to 1878. And in the biography that's here, they bring down a little bit, I found in the Hebrew, they bring down a biography about what happened with this fight over the rabbinate in Warsaw. But if you look on page 5, this lines up perfectly. I found something in the Yivo Encyclopedia. This was a great Yiddish resource, the Yivo Library. They have an encyclopedia. You'll see about Rav Yaakov Gesundheit there, that again, it's got him from 1868 to 1878, 1816 to 1878. And if you look at what was the thing, what was the machlokas? So first of all, he was an incredibly passionate misnagid. He did not like the Hasidic movement. And in Poland, the Hasidic movement was taking off like wildfire. And it seems that some of the people, I guess, who were very passionate Hasidim, it seems as if something went on here, that they were looking for an opportunity to get someone who was more sympathetic to their cause in to be the rabbi instead of him. And again, it's hard for us to understand. This goes back to the 1800s, where this whole battle between Hasidim and non-Hasidim was being waged, but it seems as if some kind of unholy alliance was made between the Hasidim and the Reform movement to basically get him unseated. And they were successful. They were able to get him unseated. That was the machlokas. And again, what was odd about this was that he had a very personal, close relationship with the Ger Rebbe. The big Hasidus in Poland was Ger, the Ger Hasidim. He had a very close relationship. That's what it's in the Hebrew thing with the Ger Rebbe. So I don't know what happened exactly, but that's the machlokas. Let's just end with one piece here. One of the rabbis who was very, very close with him, and I don't know if he took part in this Shalom delegation or not, but he was very close with him, and he was masbid. And when he died, he gave a hesped, eulogized him, was none other than the original Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik. So that would have been the great-grandfather of the famous Rav Yasha Ber Soloveitchik of Boston and New York, of Yeshiva University. And here's something that Rav Soloveitchik from New York and Boston, from Yeshiva University, said over about his great-grandfather, the bottom of page 5. So this is from Rabbi Silber in Baltimore. It says, the Torah is teaching us an incredible lesson. In our quest for personal spirituality, we must be ever vigilant of the feelings of those around us. Even if one is on a mission from God, even if one is engaged in the most holy and spiritually pure endeavors, one is never exempt from maintaining the highest levels of interpersonal conduct. Building one's relationship with God is never a license to trample on my relationship with the other. Rav Soloveitchik Zatzal told a beautiful story involving his great-grandfather, the Beis Halevi, Rav Yosef Ber Soloveitchik. The Beis Halevi was in Warsaw and decided to visit Rav Yaakov Gesundheit. We're on page 6. Sorry, let me just turn this to page 6. So he says he visited Rav Yaakov Gesundheit, the Rav of the city. As the two great rabbis were seated in the living room, they heard the Jewish maid begin to sing. She must have been in the kitchen working, and she must have had a nice voice. Started singing. Rabbi Gesundheit got up and was going to ask her to please lower her voice. There's a concept in Jewish law of kol isha. Under certain circumstances, a man is not permitted to hear a woman sing. Rav Yosef Ber took hold of his host's arm and pulled him aside. The Rav of Warsaw asked the Beis Halevi why he stopped him. I'll explain my actions, the Rav said, Rav Yosef Ber. Your maid works hard. The only enjoyment and pleasure she has is singing. It's true that we're enjoined from listening to her singing, but we can step outside or go into a different room. However, you want her to stop singing. That's not fair. It's her only enjoyment. So he was saying, if you don't want to hear Kol Isha, so we'll leave. It's our problem. We'll go out. Let her sing. That gives her some relief from the difficulty of being a maid. The Beis Halevi understood that we must be unwavering and unyielding in the fulfillment of our halachic obligations, but we must honor our spiritual responsibilities with concurrent sensitivity to the needs of the other. This was the lesson of Avraham Avinu. We must strive to grow spiritually, but never at the expense of feelings of another. You can be the man of God, father of monotheism, patriarch of a nation, but you must still be vigilant how you treat your fellow man. A beautiful story. That was Rav Yasha Ber Salvechik and Rav Yaakov Gesundheit that I think many of us never knew much about. And that's something there. So we'll conclude with that. So these were 3 items about the Parsha. The first had to do with the power that human nature has to care about our possessions. The second, and why we got to be aware of that. The second was about how easily influenced we are, and we need to be on the lookout for that and to see and to check in every so often just to make sure that our worldview and our values align with the Torah and not what's going on around us. And when they're in conflict, they're not always in conflict, but if they are. And this third one from the Znaim Torah from Rav Sorotzkin, what he brought down from Rav Yaakov Gesundheit, this beautiful idea to explain why the Kohanim were involved in the Egla Arufa ritual, and to remind us what the goal of the Kohanim were, that they were the powerful ones to bless Bnei Israel with Shalom. And if something happens on their watch, then they bear some degree of responsibility. And that's what he uses to make sense of this pasuk, which seems to be very wordy and almost doesn't make sense why the Kohanim are involved. This helps us understand that. And with that, I'm gonna stop the recording. I hope some of these sources were meaningful and played a role in helping us gain a better appreciation of the parsha. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop the recording.